Terrified as I was of the alien soldiers currently approaching my craft, still I couldn't bring myself to stop staring at them. Aliens. Real aliens. Finally getting a good look at the approaching group, my eyes and brain raced in conjunction to catalog their features. As a child, it had always been my dream to explore the stars and make contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. However, as I grew to learn more and more about the physics of space travel, I'd ultimately realized that my dream was essentially impossible. We weren't anywhere close to the level of technology necessary to properly explore even our own galactic zip code, let alone faraway systems. In the end, I resolved that if I couldn't experience that myself, I wanted to make sure that eventually someone could, even if that someone wouldn't be born for another 1,000 years. Looking back on it from the window of my exploration vessel, maybe I'd been just a tad pessimistic about that number. Unfortunately, the old sci-fi trope of alien animal groups resembling those on Earth didn't seem to hold true here. These people, whoever they were, definitely wouldn't fit well with any of our categories. Small, icy blue scales shaped like flat pebbles adorned their necks. Their arms, by contrast, were decorated by what appeared to be white feathers, vestigial wings, perhaps. While the specimens on either side of the scientist were concealed largely by body armor and helmets, the one between them provided a much more detailed view of their anatomy. Slight lumps of fat on the chest area suggested mammary glands of some description. Yet another middle finger to my understanding of evolutionary biology, but at least a helpful middle finger, given that it pointed me toward this alien's sex. Atop her head, a crest of similarly pristine feathers stretched down like human hair, concealing one of her, presumably 2, ears, which resembled in passing those of a fantasy elf, but curvier and with 2 prongs at the top instead of 1. Just a few paces shy of my vessel's door, the trio halted in place. It looked like the scientist was trying to persuade the 2 soldiers of something. Both of them seemed rather hesitant to follow her orders, but after a brief exchange of what I could best describe as organized birdsong, the pair reluctantly stepped aside and allowed the researcher to continue her approach unaccompanied. Switching my gaze over to one of the ship's cameras for a better view on this approaching stranger, a sudden wave of panicked realization washed over me. I am first contact? Shit! How do you even greet an alien? Smiling was definitely a no-go. Even back on Earth, most animals would see that as a threat. With my luck, they'd probably mistake it for me having some sort of predatory nature and just gun me down then and there. That being said, waving may not be the best play either. I didn't know if these guys had sharp talons, but startling them seemed like a pretty bad first test of that. Still, what gestures in the animal kingdom are universally non-threatening? Sifting through my slowly defrosting memory, I recalled at one point learning about the habits of gorillas and how to survive meeting one in the wild. I found weird things on the web growing up. In social animals, lowering oneself is usually a gesture of submission. So, with little time to ponder anything else, I turned toward the door of my ship and offered a cordial kneel as the door was pried open by some sort of mechanical lever, probably hydraulic for the sheer strength, to allow inside a real, in-the-flesh alien. For whatever it was worth, she didn't seem displeased by my gesture of surrender. More confused than anything, in fact. Tora Keetreat? The nonsense noise hung around me like some form of inquiry, but naturally I hadn't the foggiest fucking clue what it meant. So instead I elected to remain silent. Approaching me with visible trepidation, the alien repeated its question to me, but again I couldn't risk responding in a way that would displease her. With my eyes cast downward, I saw that she wasn't wearing shoes, but instead left on display her 4-toed talons that looked like they could easily slash an artery if swung right. Dadarakan Terit. The sudden sensation of a warm, finger-like appendage pressing my chin upward by its foreclaw sent my danger-detecting instincts into overdrive. Disregarding entirely the claw's bluntness and gentle movement, I recoiled away from its owner with a short burst of backward movement. Naturally, being part of the graceful primate lineage and a member their most intelligent species by far, I was easily able to evade this danger by elegantly falling flat on my ass and in a stroke of brilliance slamming my spine against the steel wall behind me. This scientist seemed every bit as frazzled as I was with the encounter, having herself collided with the shuttle door in the midst of our mutual confusion. A light hiccuping noise emanated from the alien's throat as she, too, toppled over onto the ground. Somewhat assured by this interaction that my life was not, in fact, about to end, I slowly eased myself upright and with gentle, telegraphed steps approached the mysterious alien woman. Noting my sudden advance upon her prone form, the stranger observed me first with eyes full of fear, followed shortly thereafter by curiosity when I knelt down once more to offer her a hand up. To my surprise, no further coaxing was required to convince this mysterious creature. Carefully wrapping her claws around my outstretched hand, the alien allowed me to help her to her feet. From outside the ship, I hadn't actually noticed how tall she was beyond a vaguely human-sized. Now, inside the ship and stood before her, it became rather apparent to me that this bird-lizard lady, despite being at least 30 centimeters a foot, shorter than the guards outside, still had a few centimeters on me. Evolving in lower gravity'll do that to you, I guess. "Hello?" I breathed anxiously, shaking her talon up and down with my friendliest close-lipped smile before slowly relinquishing it back to the alien, whose look of absolute fascination identified her as a scientist at heart. Pointing to myself for emphasis, I continued, "I am a human. Human." Swishing her head feathers in a gesture perhaps similar in meaning to cocking one's head, the researcher parted her lips and in a sweet, sing-song voice spoke. "Human! Yes!" I pumped my fist triumphantly, nodding my head up and down in frantic affirmation of her attempt to pronounce a human word. This alien researcher seemed at least open to communicating with me, so that was definitely a good sign. This being said, I was beginning to understand why universal translators were such integral sci-fi tech. Actually being able to understand each other would take a while unless I found some way to expedite the process. Replicating the gesture she'd just seen me perform seconds prior, the alien scientist pointed a claw to her own chest and with it held there spoke a single foreign word which I presumed to be her name. Vavi. Imagine, if you will, trying to learn a language. It can be frustrating sometimes, right? Attempting to understand entirely new words and sentence structure. Now, imagine if you had to learn that language by playing charades with an alien velociraptor. With that context in mind, this was going surprisingly well. After a few hours of back and forth with Vavi, it seemed like we had both obtained at least a rudimentary understanding of each other's languages, enough to communicate basic concepts and semi-define new words. "Human ship from?" inquired Vavi, tossing her head feathers aside in what amounted to a body language question mark. Tossing those 3 simple words around in my head, I quickly came to the conclusion that she was wondering where I'd come from. Such a question was easy to ask, and very much expected from a fellow scientist. However, for me, trying to teach astronomy through interpretive dance held roughly the same appeal as deep-throating a cactus, which is to say very little. So standing from my prior position and reflexively dusting off my perfectly clean lab coat, I gestured rather pointlessly for Vavi to follow me as I began my long, treacherous journey to my desktop, not 5 steps away. While it was clear she understood what the ship's computer was, still something about it seemed to fascinate Vavi. Approaching the device alongside me, I could already see her visibly picking it apart in her mind, craning her neck as though to take in its every angle and feature. Clicking my way through all the computer's needlessly complicated user interfaces, eventually I was able to navigate into my ship's route log. After a brief series of loading screens and followed by 3 whole walls of error text about me being off course, a map of the nearby star systems twinkled into view, centered on one particular little yellow dot around which this planet was orbiting. A K-class star, one lower on the main sequence than Sol, a G-class, making it both more abundant and longer living than our sun, practically ideal for life. Lucky bastards, I mused to myself ironically. Behind me, I could feel Vavi's piercing gaze glinting off the monitor as a little red line traced my lightly zigzagging path along a 3-dimensional graph of the Milky Way, eventually landing on Earth in the Sol system. "From there," I said, pointing to the indicated star. Taking Vavi's stunned expression as permission to continue my lesson, I double-clicked on the Sol system and from it conjured a perfectly rendered image of the planets orbiting therein. Then, zooming in on the replica solar system's third planet, I placed my fingertip below its name and with resting it there craned my neck to face the alien scientist. Earth. Frantically scribbling down notes with her species equivalent of a pencil, Vavi nodded along with my explanation. Earth, she enunciated carefully, spelling the planet's name in her native language before then stepping even closer to the computer and nervously jabbing a claw at the screen. Trobod Ormag Twetalel, she commanded slowly, giving me time to translate it. Trobod means repeat. Ormag is home, so she wants me to go back and view this system. Complying with Vavi's request, I quickly retraced my steps back to the system in which I currently found myself and selected a closer view. While we hadn't had any detailed images of this place when I first set out, the ship's AI rendering system was designed to fill in blanks based on its imaging software, so it came as no surprise seeing the detailed planetary images. Only 5 planets orbited this system, 4 terrestrials and 1 gas giant a bit larger than Jupiter. The first planet was a classic victim of the runaway greenhouse effect, not unlike our Venus. Planet 4 was rather interesting. At first glance, it looked like a verdant paradise, but those blues and greens weren't from water and plants, but instead a dead surface of oxidized copper. The third was a veritable super-Earth, with easily twice the radius of humanity's cradle world. Its oxygen-rich surface and large ocean looked ideal for a biosphere, and the strange orange splotches across its surface suggested an alternative form of chlorophyll used by the plants there. If I had been shown this system and asked to wager on which one we'd find civilization on, it'd be that one. I would have lost a lot on money on that one. Indeed, my ship's beacon was currently broadcasting from the second planet, a somewhat smaller world than Earth, with only about half the surface area. Of that surface, only about 40% was on land, centralized on what appeared to be 2 halves of a fragmenting supercontinent, with a few island archipelagos dotted elsewhere. Arkisa, Vavi cooed reverently, looking upon her homeworld as though seeing it in its entirety for the very first time. Small size aside, their planet was a beautiful place. It almost reminded me of those artists' renditions of Mars had it still an atmosphere. Those images always instilled in me a strange sense of mourning for Earth's stillborn sister, a longing for what could have been. I wondered at times if maybe had it just a slightly larger core, then perhaps humanity might have had company, exploring the stars with our fellow children of Sol. Optimistic, sure, but a nice thought nonetheless. A small pop-up icon at the bottom of my computer screen quickly returned me to the present with its annoying ringtone. Before sending me off on this trip, the other lab techs insisted that they'd install some content to keep my mind sharp while I was out here. Unfortunately, it seemed the team of 5 talented engineers hadn't thought to turn off the notifications when installing things in sensitive technology. Luckily, I wasn't in the middle of anything life or death, because if I had been, that message from Cleo, the language tutor AI, might have taught me what the wordy means by example. Why'd they even install a linguistics AI on this thing? Yes, I'm sure it keeps your mind sharp to learn something new, but what use could I possibly have for learning more Earth languages? Rolling my eyes at the useless notification, I casually dragged my cursor over to the large X button next to it. Unfortunately, I had waited too long to do so, as the notification had begun receding, shifting a side cancel button and instead causing me to click the application. Oh, you've got to be joking, this stupid piece of... Immediately, the screen went black, as in its very center, a small mascot icon resembling a cutesy rendition of Cleopatra began to speak at full, deafening volume. Hello, I am Cleo, the computerized language education overseer. I am here to help you learn any language you want to know. I'm excited to do some learning of my own, as my database can be updated to include entirely new dictionaries if need be. Please right-click to get started on your language adventure. Maneuvering my cursor all about in search of the exit button, I eventually found it centered right on the forehead of Vavi's reflection. Wait a minute. A language app. I had a self-learning linguistic AI this entire time. Am I a fucking idiot?